Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a good day to you, doctor. My name is Firdaus Yau'S, and today I will be recording this video to talk about my favorite literary element from the novella called We Have Always Lived in a Castle by Shirley Jackson. Right, so this novella was released back in 1962, and Shirley Jackson is well known for her more gothic themes. So in today's video I would like to talk about one of the more central themes of this novella, and it's about isolation. Okay, so the plot follows a few main characters. One of them is Maricat and her older sister Constance, who live with their uncle Julian in seclusion, where everyone else in the community outside of their region views them as hostile due to their questionable background. Alright, so the first element of isolation in this story comes from the physical aspect. So this story follows the Blackwood family, which consists of the characters I mentioned before, and they live on an estate which is separated from the other villages in the community. So it's fenced off, gated off, away from the other villages. So this element is then reinforced when the villagers act very hostile towards the family. So for example, Maricat is being made fun of, people poke fun at her and make very demeaning rhymes about her as well. So this not only reinforces the element of isolation from a physical aspect, but actually from a more psychological and even an emotional standpoint. Now this brings me to my second point, which is psychological isolation. So from Maricat's narration, we can get a little bit of an insight to how creepy and borderline disturbing her thoughts are. So she finds a lot of comfort in her own isolation. Even the thought of interacting with the outside world scares her. So she even comes up with her own imaginary spells and rituals that can ward off the villagers away. So this could also be a sign of a mental withdrawal, which represents how she has alienated herself from reality. So this is not done just to avoid society, but also as a way to avoid confronting with her own dark past, which is her family's death. So the recurring imagery of protective objects and Maricat's rituals, so they basically underscore her psychological distance from the world around her. Basically shows how she is very detached from reality, and she resorts to these imaginary spells and rituals just so that she wouldn't have to connect with others, and this stunts her ability to interact with the outside world. On to my third point, which is also an effect of isolation, which is social exclusion, and it has its own sets of consequences as well. So the villagers tend to treat the Blackwood sisters and the family as a whole in a very cruel manner, and this is an effect of isolation. So the sisters are feared and shunned due to the mysterious deaths of their own family. Some of them even accused Constance of being the murderer, and she was put on trial, but she was then later acquitted. So this isolation manifests in their complete lack of a social life. They rarely ever get visits, and if they do, it's from their neighbor called Helen Clark. So the author uses this as a form of commentary to show that how people will oppose you just for being different, and without even knowing the full story, everyone just jumps to a conclusion and opposes you immediately. So this also emphasizes on the dangers of mob mentality. So the sisters are not just isolated, they are imprisoned by the village's judgment. For my fourth point, I would like to retrace back to the house and what it symbolizes. So the Blackwood house itself is a symbol of the Blackwoods family's own isolation. The house is secluded and is in a decaying state, and it represents the family's gradual retreat from the outside world. It's completely shrouded in mystery, no one knows anything about them, so that's why the community tends to act hostile towards them. So the fact that Constance never goes out and Maricat rarely goes out from the house, and if she does it's just to get groceries, shows their complete isolation from society. So the house becomes a figurative prison in a way because it traps them in their own grief and fear. For my last point, I would like to talk about the impact of isolation on the characters in this novel. So even when Constance appears to be content with her own role, which is being trapped in the house, she seems fine on a superficial level, but for Maricat, her own isolation leads to delusion and paranoia. The rituals and routine spells which I mentioned earlier, they paint a picture that the psychological toll isolation has taken on Maricat is immense. She resorts to these imaginary spells to avoid all these villages. And this shows a stark contrast with Uncle Julian, who is physically and mentally trapped in the past. He keeps replaying the traumatic events that caused their isolation, which in this case is the family's death. So his constant recounting of the family's history reveals how isolation has basically warped his own perception of reality. He cannot move on from the past. As for my conclusion and to wrap everything up, isolation plays a huge role in this story. It shapes the lives of the Blackwood family, Maricat, Constance, Uncle Julian, while it also drives the plot forward. So the author really digs deep into the idea of isolation. So it's not just as a way to build suspense, but as a way to explore how being cut off from the world can affect people, both mentally and emotionally. The Blackwood family's physical separation from the village is just the beginning. They live behind gates and fences, which mirrors their emotional distance from the people around them. So for Maricat, this isolation becomes a way of life. She hides in her own strange routines and magical thinking, as if trying to create her own safe world. But as the story goes on and progresses, we can see that this psychological isolation has a toll. She becomes more disconnected from reality, and we start to question how much of her behavior is about survival and how much is about avoiding the world entirely and completely. Then there's the social isolation. The village's hostility and suspicion, they keep the Blackwoods at arm's length. They've been branded as outsiders because of their family's history and their mysterious death, and that sense of being excluded only deepens their isolation. Again, the author uses this tension as a form of commentary on how people who don't fit in often are pushed aside, judged, and treated quite unfairly. It's also a powerful reminder of how harmful exclusion can be, not just for the people being pushed away, but for society as a whole. So this theme of isolation does more than just drive the plot. It also makes us think bigger about other issues in this world, like how being cut off from others can really mess with our minds, and how rejecting people who are different can have serious consequences, both physically and mentally. So it's easy to see the parallels between the Blackwoods isolation and how people in real life can feel when they are, when they are marginalized or misunderstood even. So I believe that is it from me. I would like to thank you, Doctor, for watching, and I believe I would like to conclude this video. Thank you.